My presentation is going to be very brief. It's about 5 slides. And I was just sharing with Manish this morning. I was a little nervous because I see a lot of people with evaluation expertise around the room, and I'm just a coordinator. But nevertheless, in my capacity as the coordination analyst, I have taken part in the UNDAF evaluation process at some point. So we have not so much rich experience, but very valid ones. I think Professor Kumar has highlighted some of the key challenges in the evaluations, and these are the usual suspects. Even Bhutan has had these challenges, and these are not very different from across the region or across the globe. So I hope to be able to provide some contribution to our colleagues from around the world. Before I get into the main focus of the presentation, I would like to give a brief background on our evaluations and the evaluation capacity scenario in the country. I'm a little guilty to mention this, but we've conducted our UNDAF MTR. I believe it's not part of our evaluations, it's just a midterm review. But nevertheless, our previous UNDAF, it covered the period 2008 to 2013, so it was over a period of 6 years. We conducted our midterm review in 2010, and we've had the end of cycle evaluations conducted from 2011 to 2012. In both the cases, it was a decision that came from the UNDAF Steering Committee. We call it the Country Program Board, which is a joint government-UN steering committee. And the UNDAF MTR was a combination of self-assessments and full outcome evaluations in 3 priority areas. We have a total of 5 we had a total of 5 UNDAF outcomes in the previous UNDAF. For the end of cycle evaluations, the UNCT felt that we would do a light evaluation. So, building on the UNDAF MTR that we had conducted in 2010, we did a gender audit, and then we did a capacity development evaluation and an environment portfolio evaluation. The CD evaluation, the capacity development evaluation, is not really an outcome, UNDAF outcome evaluation, but because the majority of the UN support in the previous UNDAF was in the area of capacity development, we thought that it was good to do a capacity development evaluation so that we could then inform and position ourselves in terms of really how we want to provide capacity development support in the next one program. The main objectives were to assess the continued relevance and effectiveness of the UNDAF and the CPAP during the MTR, so then we could use the next 2 or 3 years to actually fill the gaps. And more importantly, it was to inform the 11th five-year plan of the government and the UN-1 program, both of which started in 2013 and 2014 January. So these were the main objectives. In terms of expenditure, evaluations are very expensive to conduct, as everyone would agree. And for a small UNCT like ours, it was a substantive amount of money that the UNCT had to put in. 90% of the evaluation during the MTR, the cost during the MTR was borne by the UNCT through a cost-shared modality, and only 10% was from DOCO. This is where I can see actually DOCO coming in when it comes to their role in evaluations, so they could give a bit more of funding, I suppose. For the end of cycle evaluations, we had not much money, so we had to access through the Bhutan UN Country Fund Steering Committee. We had to actually allocate 50% of actually the 50% of the cost had to be met from the one fund account, and the other portion was contributed by UNDP. So this is the background in brief. When it comes to evaluation capacity, it's one of the biggest challenges that we've faced, and I think this is the case in so many other countries as well. When I say evaluation capacity, it's not just in the UN, but it is across the government, the CSOs, the private sector, and all our implementing partners, even the private sector. So it was really a difficult difficult experience, I would say, when it comes to really having that capacity, because from the private sector to carry out the so-called independent evaluations, we had to have people from outside, and because we have a very small base of evaluators in the country, it was very difficult for us to get experts. So we had to hire people from the region and even from New York, I think. So our expenditure shot up because of this. However, the situation now is a little different. I mean, we still don't have the capacity to the extent that we would like to, but at least from the government side, now there is increased focus on evaluation. There is an national evaluation strategy in place, but it was shelved, I think, for the longest time, and the government is now finally thinking of developing that into an evaluation policy. So I think the work has just begun on that front. From the UN side, we're also going to be, the one program which started in January this year, we have a strong component on our support to the government in terms of building the national evaluation capacity. We have the National Evaluation Association, which started in 2012. I think we're going to be supporting that. So it will be a sector-wide support to capacity development in the government. On the challenges, like I said, evaluation capacity is one of the biggest challenges. I'm not going to elaborate on that. One of the other challenges that we've faced while conducting our evaluations is that in our previous UNDAF, we've had very weak UNDAF indicators. They were not smart, I believe, and this came across in all the evaluations. And it was quite difficult for the evaluators to actually to assess progress. There is no accountability after conducting our evaluations. There's no accountability fixed on anyone to actually implement the recommendations, and there is not much evidence where we've used our findings for evidence-based decision-making or for policy decisions. So the usage part is not a very good story. I think it's just more or less a requirement that you've met and then you're done. There was also a lot of difficulty that we faced in trying to get our partners to agree on the findings and recommendations. So this is a challenge to the independence of the evaluations that we conduct. A lot of people at different levels try and influence the findings and the recommendations. Managing expectations of the partners was also a major difficulty that we faced. For example, when we conducted the capacity development evaluation, because it is capacity development and people, especially our partners in the government, feel it's about capacity building of their institutions and their personal capacity building, they become somehow very sensitive, and then a lot of expectations arise as a result of this word capacity development. So managing their expectations in terms of this was very difficult. There is no uniform implementation of management response across agencies, and I'm very sorry, no offense to the other agencies here, but it was in our case only UNDP that diligently followed up on the recommendations. So it is difficult, and especially in a small country team like ours, it was very difficult to get the UNCT to commit themselves and to engage in the follow-up after the evaluations. Across the government, the culture of conducting evaluations is lacking. And most of the times when we conduct evaluations or reviews, it's mostly because it is required by your donor or your partner. So it's only out of requirement that evaluations are actually conducted. And even in our case, the UNDAF, of course, it was the decision of the country program board, which is co-chaired by the government, but it was more a recommendation from the UNCT. So, I mean, unless there's a drive or a push from the UN side, the government actually never really thinks about conducting evaluations. And one of the, I think, other major challenge is funding constraints. Like I said, the UNCT faced tremendous pressure during the last years of the UNDAF, trying to get money to do the evaluations, and to the point that it actually at one point, people had to discuss about compromising the evaluations because of lack of funds. So it does influence a lot of your decision. And okay, the last one is fatigue among partners as a result of multiple evaluations conducted at around the same time. In our case, we had the government's 10th plan midterm review, the UNDAF midterm review, and other agency-specific MTRs like the UNICEF. So people were quite tired of consultations and evaluations. So this was a general feeling of fatigue among the people. This is the last slide, lessons learned. There is a need for the government to take full ownership of the evaluations, not just in terms of process and participation, but even in terms of funding. We feel that there is a need for the government to contribute. There's also the need to invest in national capacity, national evaluation capacity. And as I mentioned, the UN is going to be supporting this in our current one program. There is a need to have proper evaluation governance structure in place. Of course, we've had evaluation management group and the reference group, but it's the same people sitting in different groups, and then a proper structure is still missing. There is the need to have smart UNDAF indicators, because this, like I said, it makes evaluation very difficult when you actually assess progress. There is a need to enhance agency accountability for reasons that I already mentioned. There is a need to strengthen the interagency planning and monitoring evaluation group in the UN, because this is the group that actually leads our UNDAF evaluations. The last one is, it was a suggestion that comes from the government, and it was in 2010, I think, when we did the UNDAF MTR, there was a specific suggestion made by the government co-chair that the agency-specific evaluation requirements be integrated into the UNDAF joint process, because especially in a DAO environment like ours, it becomes difficult, and even for reasons to, such as avoiding fatigue among partners. This was a recommendation which we submitted to DOCUD in our resident coordinator's annual report, but somehow this has never been taken up. So I hope this is something that colleagues around the room will consider taking this seriously. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the very interesting presentation.